Launching a software startup can feel like walking a tightrope, balancing innovation and risk. Our guest today, David Hirschfeld, shares a methodology that has helped many startups achieve product market fit faster while sidestepping common pitfalls. Join us as we uncover how AI, efficient team building, and strategic risk management can transform your entrepreneurial journey. This is PhraSEOlogy AI with your host, Filipe Santos. As a digital marketing professional specializing in SEO for over 20 years, I've worked with companies from startups to global Fortune 500 companies. Learn how to gain an unfair advantage from AI as we uncover tips, tools, and strategies for a killer edge. Meet David Hirschfeld, founder and CEO of Techies Inc., whose 30 years plus in software startups have revolutionized how businesses achieve success and is actually the creator of the launch first methodology. David advises startups in reaching product market fit faster, basically dodging common pitfalls and transforming challenges into true opportunities for growth. In this episode, he'll share some actionable tips. David, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about yourself and maybe introduce any other details I might have missed.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Filipe. And just because it's an unabashed plug, I'm also host of Scaling Smarter podcast. So I founded Techies 17 years ago. That was after having successfully started and exited a software startup in logistics, route distribution, inventory management prior to that. And I thought I knew what I was doing because despite everything my partner and I did, we ended up having 800 customers in 22 countries over about 8 years and sold our company to a publicly traded firm. So, here I am, an expert. And then I come to find out the things that I did that made us successful, not the things I thought I did. So I learned a lot of this by working with over 80 clients over the last 17 years, especially in the first 10 years or so. And a couple of them wildly successful. One of them even an iPad product that was announced by Tim Cook during the iPad Air launch several years back. He did a video montage with 7 products on the video that said, this is how our iPad has changed our lives. And our product, to my surprise, was one of the products showcased in that little video montage. Most of them fail. They lack product market fit because they wait way too long to start to generate revenue and prove that there's a market that wants to pay money for their product. And usually they only find that out after having invested a lot of money and putting a lot of their intellectual property into this product over a long period of time. And then they go out to market and find out the market doesn't want to buy it. So that's why I came up with Launch First. I started to recognize a pattern with the ones that were successful is that they were focused on solving the problem. That's what they love, is the problem, not the product. They weren't build a religion around their product. What they did was they said, what's the problem? Why is that a problem? I want to talk to the customer and see if I get consistent feedback or if there are different nuances to this problem. So they spent a lot of time with their potential customers and existing customers, and they love the problem. The solution in terms of the software is just a natural evolution of mitigating the problem, not the vision to be in love with, I'm going to create something disruptive, I'm going to reinvent the world, right? Those are the founders that I always try to kind of talk them off the ledge and see if I can get them into put the white coat on and become a clinician about their business instead of the black robes and become a religious fanatic about their business. You need to love your product. You need to have vision, but with a critical eye to what's wrong with my business, what's wrong with my product, what don't I understand about the customer, what don't I understand about problem. So anyway, this is how Launch First was born.
It's akin to using your gut or using data-driven knowledge. And if
Right.
you're able to do both well, then you're not married to something so tightly that you can't make good decisions. So I love that.
Right.
I think that's very impressive.
Thank you. It's gut test, feedback, learn something, try that, test, right? It's so the whole lean startup philosophy, but one step beyond that, where we actually start to generate revenue for potential clients before we even start building the product. Because there's no other way to really validate market test other than to prove that you can sell your product to multiple people, who you believe your targets. And the cost of each sale has to be a a third or less of what that lifetime value of that customer is to say, okay, I know I've just proven that I can get past this thing I call a viability barrier, that I can build a company that's viable, that can scale and grow and meet the needs of a particular market.
So I had a question for you based on what you kind of explained to me before. I'd love to know what kind of inspired you to create this method besides just like that one situation you mentioned. How does it really mainly differ from traditional startup methodologies?
So that's a really, actually, I love that question because with traditional startup methodologies, there's a lot of good information there. But the problem I find with them is each step in this process is siloed and subjective. It's siloed in that it's done kind of all by itself and you finish it and you move on to the next. And it's subjective in terms of you have to decide when you've completed that section and whether you've done it right and completely or not. There isn't really strong metrics that say, okay, I've done every of the things I need to do in this step. I know I have because the metrics show me they're all done. And I know I've done it correctly because the metrics say, because I can test that it's done correctly, right? And that's what's missing from most startup methodologies from my perspective. And most of them are focused on getting investment. So like if you connect with an incubator or accelerator, and there are especially incubators, and they're incubating your startup with the idea that you're going to end up with a pitch deck and maybe an MVP and get in front of all these investors, that right, that's their goal. The problem is that your chances of raising money, even in that situation, is such a small percentage. So like the average VC, and I've talked to several VCs who have corroborated these numbers. And then I went and spoke to VC friends that I have, and they corroborate these numbers pretty accurately. So a VC will get 3,000 pitch decks. Out of those 3,000 pitch decks, they will fund 30 of those. So you have 1 in 100 chance when you're pitching a VC that you'll be able to raise money from that VC. And then the odds go way down depending on how your organization is structured, what category you're in, all those sorts of things, or they go up. You know, if you're a Stanford grad or a Stanford dropout, right, and you're doing something in AI, your chances go way up. But for the mere mortals like me, your chances of raising money in that scenario are very low if you haven't proven you've got product market fit and you're not on a inclining revenue stream already. If you have those things, then it's a different conversation with investors altogether. And out of the 30 that they fund, 3 of them will be successful and scale. The rest of them either are just struggling for years and the founders are barely making a living, or they fail completely. And this is kind of how the whole investment world has driven the startup community to focus on raising money instead of focus on building a business. And all the time you spend trying to raise money is time you don't spend building your business, creating pitch decks, pitching to investors, working on all the investment document and legal. None of that is building your business in terms of building a marketing stack, developing customer experience, customer onboarding capabilities, you know, building your organization, your team, which you can't do without money. Go out to your clients and start to generate revenue before you even start to develop your product by doing pre-launch sales. So we used to do wireframes like a lot of design firms did, where you have lots of screens. You might have lines between them showing the flows. Maybe we made it so you could click on something, it would navigate to another screen. And what we found is that founders would approve the design as we complete it, and then realize once we start to develop the functionality and they start to play with it, that it is missing things they just didn't realize weren't there because there wasn't enough richness in this design user experience. So they didn't realize that it didn't flow and support the business in the right way until they started to play with the software. And we'd have to go back and it would be very costly. And so we're doing all this iteration in the software development. So we started building what I call high fidelity prototype. A high fidelity prototype, if I were to demo it to you, you would think you're looking at the real product. It's in terms of how the screen behaves, the controls on the screen, the navigation, the error messages. It looks like a real product. We got really good at this and we started to do this for all our clients where we spend all our time iterating in the design, and it reduced our development time by like 90%, all the iteration and development by about 90%, because we worked out all those things. And so now when they're getting a product to test, it's exactly what they expect because I have already played with it from the prototype. So I started thinking, why don't we take these prototypes and go to potential clients and see if we can't get them to buy in early. We'll give them some, if they're really solving a big problem for this client that they know this is something they have to have once it's available. If we give them a high enough value offer now, maybe a lifetime license if they pay for a year in advance, or if it's maybe a clinical trial software management product, maybe we give them free implementation because that's usually the big cost of clinical trial software, or whatever the high value thing is that stakeholder would say, wow, I don't want to miss out on this opportunity. I know the problem this is solving is so big, I have to have it as soon as it's available. Then they'll buy in that pre-launch sale in enough numbers that you can prove that viability, that you can get past that viability barrier. You start development because we know what to develop, and we keep selling because now we've got a sales and marketing engine that's building our business. And now we're building this big cadre of beta customers, right? And who are invested in the product, not like free betas that have no investment and give you all the wrong feedback. But these are betas that they paid for it. They need the product. And if you still need investment and want to go to investor, you have a whole different discussion with an investor because you can show traction and demand for a product that hasn't even launched yet.
So in getting that product market fit and in becoming more efficient, have you started to use any with some of the process work or some of the workflows or anything to help even take
Yeah.
that a step further?
I'm going to step back just a little bit and talk about founders and what's founders' number one job when they're starting a new software company. Their number one job is to figure out what are all the niches. I'm kind of thinking spreadsheet visual here. What are all the niches across the top that you might be able to target? And niche is I have my own methodology for what makes a niche, but there's usually a lot more than a founder realizes when you break it down to these small niches, right? So here's all the niches, right? But I can't market all these niches. I have to pick one. What are all the problems I'm solving for when I stand in the stakeholders' shoes of each of these niches? What are the problems that I'm solving at the root problem definition level? And that root problem is the thing that will, when you say it to a stakeholder in that niche, they lean forward and they go, I hate that. And then they ask, can you make that stop? Can you fix that problem? That's a root level problem, not a generic high level problem. But the thing, it has some kind of triggers some kind of survival response when you say that problem statement to a stakeholder. So you list all those down. And now, if you think about it, you have all these niches and you have all these problem statements that you're solving. Which niche has the highest problem statement from a perceived impact perspective? In other words, they perceive this as a big problem, whether it really is or not. But their perception is it's one of those things that just scares them if they don't fix it. And what is the highest cost for the impacts? A stakeholder may say, this problem feels really big to me, but its actual cost to me is not that big. Whereas another stakeholder may say, this truly has a huge cost. And what you need is both of those things to be as high as possible. So that's the job of founders. Number one job is which niche has the top 2 or max 3 problems with the highest perceived impact and it costs them the most, those two numbers together. And then there's a lot of other things you have to nail down, like, okay, but the sales cycle can't be a year, can't be impossible to reach these stakeholders because they're CEOs of Fortune 100 companies. You can't, things like, there's all kinds of other metrics that go into that. But what you want to do is find the top 2 or 3 niches that fall into that category and then whittle it down based on some of these other things. So that's the number one job for a founder, because once they understand that, that may change the product, that may change the priorities in terms of their roadmap. It may change the way that they were planning on marketing and selling this and how they reach these people. And when you've nailed that for those problem statements that you're trying to solve, you can go out now because you know how much it costs them. You know it's a high impact. You know how to speak to that a stakeholder, and you can say, I'm giving you this rare opportunity to get in early, and you're demoing something that looks like you've already built the product, and they'll buy. So now AI, your question was AI. this is a tedious process. And it's an iterative process as we're going through this. What we do is we basically create these matrices and do a scoring algorithm, both for cost and for impact scores. And then we bubble chart this so that the top two or three are in the upper right of that bubble chart. And so we know which ones we need to do a deep drill into to figure out which is the top. If there's a niche you don't really know that well, that will cause you to then call two or three stakeholders in that niche and do a mini discovery call on them with the problems you understand they have and learn about problems you may not have understood that they have. And so what you end up doing is you end up making a lot of calls, but very niche specific, just because you need to understand, not because there's a discovery call step. You're asking them, how much did that impact you? How much did that cost you? That sort of thing. But this is a tedious process because you can imagine these matrices have maybe 200 cells in them, right? So this is where AI helps us a lot. And we're building an AI tool specifically for nailing down that niche and carrying a founder through this process, which takes them a couple of weeks right now, a very tedious work. And a lot of founders fatigue trying to do this. We want to turn that into a couple hours of work, with some phone calls and feedback to learn and understand. But right now we're using a lot of the deep dive part. We use AI to help us with the deep dive about stakeholders in certain industries. And it's really powerful. It saves a lot of time, but it doesn't do the scoring. That's something we have to build our own AI engine for that.
Now, curious about that because obviously it makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned quite a bit about startups encountering or working with customers that are on the corporate level, maybe like a Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 company. And in that case, because B2B can be pretty long in terms of a sales cycle, in terms of getting them to validate, do you find that some of this, the use of AI can help with reducing those sales times or maybe producing things that would be needed as part of that customer journey? I
Oh,
would love
yeah.
to kind of get a sense of that from you.
Yeah. So with like in that scenario, so I always say if a founder comes to me and they are working in an industry and they are struggling with a problem themselves, so they really have a cellular level understanding of the impact that problem has to them and how much it costs them, and they can articulate the value of solving that problem, and that they are part of an industry full of people that do exactly what they do, and they can validate that other people are struggling with the same problem they're struggling with in the same way, and there isn't another product available on the market that solves that problem in a consumable way for the stakeholder in that niche, whether they're small or medium or large business, and a product that's targeted in that area. And they have some reach to those other people that are doing what they do with the same problems in terms of conferences or mastermind groups or networking meetings or mailing lists. They have some reach to that community. If they have those ingredients, they are 70 or 80% more likely to be successful. So if they are not in any of those and they just have a great idea and they think it's going to take off, that chances of them being successful are pretty small because that's the gut thing. That's not the clinical thing. They may actually have a vision for something that really will take off, but then you really want to test the heck out of it very early, through talking to people and then the pre-launch sale idea, right? So the customer journey part, now you know who these people are, right? Let's say you're a founder, you understand the industry, you understand the stakeholders pretty well because you're one of them, at least in a certain niche. And now you're using AI to kind of craft that journey, right? To craft the outreach program, the marketing drip campaign, to be able to reach them, how to structure a survey that will get people in that niche to respond to your surveys. The AI is so powerful in all these ways, right? To figure out if I want to start to produce content to gauge the interest in terms of people's engagement with the content, what's the keywords I need to use to pull these people in? How do I structure a social media campaign? AI is just really powerful for doing all these things. And there's really good tools on the market that have been built specifically for this. And we do a lot with that, right? Some of these things we're formalizing, like I said, in our own products to facilitate them getting through this process and launch a lot faster with a lot less effort.
Have you found any particular tools that aren't proprietary that have helped kind of at least shape how you can use these, let's say, methodologies or these concepts in the work that you're doing to create more efficiency?
Because I have a digital marketing guy that works for me who has nailed down a bunch of these tools, especially for the social outreach, for the article structuring keywords. There's several different tools that he uses. And I'll provide those links to you if you want to put them in the podcast, but they're incredibly powerful. So we're producing some long form articles right now on how to build what it means to be an exceptional software development team. Because there's a huge difference between contracting a decent software development team versus an exceptional one. And there's all these artifacts that exceptional teams produce consistently that typical teams do not do. So we're doing this long series like of 11 articles, one that's a summary, but these are long form articles. That's a summary of all the things. And then there's an article on each of those things. So 10 different points that I made in this article. He's created all this visual content for this article that's really engaging. For each article, there's probably 10 to 15 different visual pieces that go into it because these are 3, 4, 5,000 word articles. And then he uses a tool for structuring the article from a keyword perspective, from a heading perspective, from a depth perspective in terms of how long it needs to be for the category. And then he has other tools where he uses to build his social media posts and campaigns. So that first article I just mentioned, and this was a brand new Medium blog that we just created. It's not one, this isn't a blog with lots of domain authority yet. The first one, after less than a week, had 500 engagements from social media, all brand new posts, which is a lot for a blog that has no domain authority yet, right? And that's because of these AI tools that he uses. I'll give them to you so you can put them in when you publish the podcast so people have access to all this.
Whether you're on the software side as a developer or an entrepreneur, or you're a marketer or an SEO that's looking to kind of work with your software team, this goes a long way. So I did want to ask you a couple of questions about your experience. I mean, obviously 30 years takes you a long way. And now that we have AI tools and machine learning, it helps quite a bit with making things more efficient. What qualities do you think make for a strong software development team? And how do you identify the right talent? Because I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah. So, and this is something I've worked really hard on over the last 17 years with my company. The number one thing is your team needs to be filled with critical thinkers at every level. So when we're recruiting, we recruit for that quality. That's one of the key things. The number one thing we recruit for is IQ. I know that sounds strange, but you can't work on somebody's IQ if their IQ isn't high enough, right? And if they're not on parity with other team members, then people on the team have to carry that person. And we don't believe in carrying people that don't fit our team. People that fit our team, we're loyal and it's a family. And the team itself is really fiercely defending this. They don't want to bring people in that are going to water it down. So they have to have really high IQ and they have to have good critical thinking skills. Meaning that they question when they're given a task. They question, is this the right task? Is there a better way to do it? How can I improve on how I work every day, how I work every week? How can I reduce time in meetings? They're always asking questions. These are critical thinkers. So that's just sort of a raw talent thing. The second thing we check for is integrity, right? We want people to have natural commitment to the things that they're doing and a high level of integrity. You can help people's integrity along, but you can't fix somebody that has real integrity cracks where they're always looking for some way to get out of things or get around things. And they cause a lot of problems in teams. We don't want automatons. We want people to be independent thinkers, but with the understanding that everything they do impacts other people on the team. The last thing we test for is skills. They have to have a certain minimal level of skill for the thing we're hiring them for. But that's the least important thing, because if they have a high IQ and they have that integrity and commitment, they can build the skill dramatically faster than somebody that's already highly skilled that lacks the other two things. We're looking for people for the long term. So this is sort of like a recruiting thing. This doesn't help your audience figure out who to pick, right? So that has to do with artifacts. What I mean by artifacts is the things that evidence of what they're producing and the consistency to deliver that. So one of them is when you get an estimate, how much detail goes into the estimate that they provide you. We will do fixed price, but we really, really stay away from it because it puts a lot of restrictions on us and it causes us to clamp down on founders in terms of scope, and nobody likes that. So it doesn't produce better products. Time and materials working with us does, not necessarily all teams, but there are other good teams out there. We're not the only really good team out there. But so one thing is the level of detail. We go through an exhaustive level of detail when we're providing an estimate to a potential new customer. This is all on our own dime. And these are very costly for us to produce. In fact, that's one of the AI tools that we're in the process of building for the last several months, is a way of mimicking our detailed estimation process, which takes a very sophisticated, we create a sophisticated requirements document. We go back and forth with the founder to make sure that we didn't miss anything so that they can make any changes to say, yeah, this is required, that's not. And that's the big vision, not what goes into the MVP. Then we take that and do a module-wise breakdown of all of the, like the registration for new users, that's a module. A typical estimate has 70 or 80 rows of modules in there, broken down by user, administration, mobile, and then we have mobile and web and back-end business rules. So, and it's just a cost of sale as far as we're concerned. And then we provide that to the founder with the ability for them to pick any one of those things and change which phase it's going into. And then at the top, it's all summarized what the cost by phase is going to be. And we're really pretty accurate with our estimates. How confident are they that they can deliver based on the time that they say? Now, anybody that says it's going to be a fairly low price and they'll deliver it in 3 months, and I don't know why 3 months is the number for these low price estimates, don't believe them, especially if you get estimates that are much, much more expensive and much longer to deliver. How can one be so cheap and so fast and the other one takes so much longer and be so much higher? The truth may be somewhere in the middle. The problem is that one that's so cheap, and even if it's fixed cost, maybe 3 months, they say, in 18 months from now, you'll still be struggling with a product that doesn't work and they won't be finished. And it doesn't matter where in the world that person is. They could be in the US, they can be in India, they can be in Europe, in Eastern Europe. It doesn't matter. It's the level of detail that you see in the estimate, because that shows a level of competence and commitment to excellence. Third thing is have them show you how they run meetings and their status reports, because there should be a lot of detail in there. And they should be able to get through that detail in 15 to 20 minutes every week, where it shows what they completed last week, what they're planning on working on this week, and what is planned after that, right? In very easy to understand terms, broken down by modules. If they're working on, let's say you're building an SDK and you're building a mobile app and you're building a web portal, so each one of those should have those things broken down for them on their own pages. And how many hours did they estimate that month in each of the different categories that they were going to spend, and what was the actual? So if you don't see actual and estimated, they probably don't have the level of detail in terms of how they track projects to be able to easily produce those numbers. And that's a warning sign. If they do hourly invoicing, how do they invoice? Are they invoicing on a blended rate, which a lot of companies do? We don't. Or is it by specialty, where they publish what the rates are by specialty in your agreement, and then there's a line item on the invoice? And do they attach the timesheets for that month to the invoices? Because if they don't, then it may be 180 hours for this particular person for that month. How do you know? But you don't know what they worked on. So now you have to ask the developer, why did this person spend so much time? I thought we were doing automated testing and we're not even that far along. And now that developer has to go back and pull all this data if they have it, which very often they won't, because they just don't track that well. So we attach our timesheets every month because we want clients to feel like it's totally transparent. They get to audit us anytime they want because they have all the data going back to the beginning of the project on what people did and when they did it. Yeah. I mean, these are artifacts. I call these artifacts, right?
No, it makes a ton of sense. And that's why I was like, I wanted to ask you something there. That, in my interpretation, is showing the complexity between teams, clients, management, and decision making. And then on top of that, even the communication, which of course the communication is probably the most important thing. So I
Right.
would ask you to keep all of those things in line, because obviously it's complicated. And I think that's one of the main uses for AI, is to help put things into perspective and also be able to just keep track of things.
Right.
How have you found different modes of AI or machine learning to help kind of keep these things together, keep these things in line and help communication so that quality is high?
So it depends on the level of automation that a team implements in terms of their backend what they do on the back end. Right now, there's not a lot of AI that manages the entire software development lifecycle, but we are implementing AI like this. This is a big wave, right? It just rose up very quickly. Nobody expected it. It's a rogue wave. All right, it's 100 feet tall, and you're surfing 3-foot waves. So you can either just sit there and get swallowed up by it, or you paddle out to the wave and you get on your board and you start riding it tiptoe of your surfboard to try to stay ahead of them. Because whatever I tell you today will be probably wildly different in 3 months or 6 months from now. The state of the art is changing so fast. Instead of trying to use AI to manage this process completely, we have tools that have AI in them for doing code validation, but other tools like aiding the deployment. For example, it's called CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment, where a programmer uploads their code to the source code library. We use GitHub. And by the way, if you're looking at a software team, make sure that the things that they want you to use, like source code library, bug tracking, task tracking, project management, that you're the account owner. They ask you to set up your own accounts and those things so that you own the source code, you have control of all the documentation. It's your hosting account that they're doing development and test on. Exceptional teams do this. Most teams surprisingly don't. They just have their own and they control everything. And then if a client wants to go to another developer, they're like pulling, dragging and pulling all the assets back to try to be able to hand something off. And we don't believe that's the right way to do it. So now where AI is making a big difference is, like, let's say automated test scripts or documenting user stories. AI is speeding up the time it takes us to create user stories because we're generating them now from AI and then validating them. Our business analysts will validate the user stories instead of having to write them all, or use a copy, paste a template, and then make the changes. This is a huge value. And AI is smart enough to be able to know that if you give it the context of the project, the user story for a specific feature, it's smart enough to then write a really smart user story with acceptance criteria and unit tests. Our QA team, which we automate testing because it makes a huge impact later. It makes a small impact initially because it's another development task. And so it's equivalent to what it takes to test about to 80%, 90% of the development of the MVP. But then the testing starts to really speed up because every time you make a change, to do it properly, you should regression test the entire app, which nobody does. And you end up with a lot of bugs that you didn't realize because there's downstream impacts depending on your pristineness in terms of your development planning and analysis and everything else. But it's not uncommon to have bugs that you didn't expect if you don't. And so what we do is we automate all this so that towards the later part of the project, as we're finishing up features or doing updates to things, and whenever it's checked in, it gets automatically tested. It first gets checked for vulnerabilities. The code gets scanned to make sure that they didn't hard code queries into the code, or they didn't hard code URLs or credentials into the code, and kicks it back to the developer if it finds any of these things, or if there's any of our standards that it's not matching. It just goes back to the developer with links to the points of the code and exactly what was wrong. They can quickly fix it. They love this. My goal is to create and implement automation that frees up developers and testers and business analysts so their value is more easily surfaces and all the minutia gets pulled away with these tools. And then assuming it passes the code scan, it goes through the automated testing. And assuming it passes that for their functionality as well as regression tests, going back and testing the rest of the application, make sure there was no unexpected downstream impacts. And then it gets sent to QA. AI is really good for building those test scripts for us. That has saved us a lot of time. So these are things, right? Different things we're doing. And we're generating code using AI, not entire applications, but functions. And, it's not quite there for entire applications. Another important thing from exceptional teams is, are they building your MVP so it's scalable? Building a scalable app used to be a lot of overhead. By scalability, I mean you're creating functionality that runs on the server in microservices, that these microservices are containerized, that And these are important keywords. Even if you don't know what they mean, they're good questions to ask. But the idea is that each component running up on the server runs as its own independent program, and it communicates with the rest of the system through a communication layer. So it may need to call another microservice, independent microservice, and it does that through a communications layer, but each one stands alone, runs independently. And if one of these services is being hit really heavily, let's say on like an image conversion program where you upload an image and it has to optimize that image into 3 different sizes, right? And that microservice may have 10,000 images all being uploaded at once. And if that's run as a microservice environment in a containerized auto-scaling environment, it can spin up 1,000 instances instantly of that particular microservice while all the others are sleeping because they don't need it. And then as soon as it's done in a minute, it scales them all back down and your costs go dramatically down, but you can handle this massive load capability very easily. We now build everything based on this. We can build it just as quickly, but we build it like this because then if your app takes off, you don't have to worry about, oh, what am I going to do now? I've got to go back and rewrite all this functionality because we can't handle our success, right? So that's another thing to ask.
That's pretty awesome. I wanted to talk about maybe
Yeah.
a story that you have about restructure and specifically how it helped recover a project that might not have been going well. I would love to have a sense of how that has happened.
Well, those are probably my favorite projects. I call them recovery projects. In fact, we got one a year and a half ago in a big healthcare project that came from one of the largest healthcare software development houses in the country, but the client was just really unhappy with them. What I love about recovery projects is there's something they're unhappy with their current team. Usually it's a combination of it's costing too much and taking too long, and they're missing deadlines, and the expectations weren't set right, and every time we get something, it's really too buggy, and it's a blend of all these things, right? The reason I love those so much is because those people recognize very quickly how different we are from who they were working with before. And so we get fans very much more quickly from them than we do from a new founder that has no idea what to expect. So they don't know that we're any different from anybody else when they're working with us, which I love those. So I'm not suggesting that I don't love those types of projects, but the recovery projects are my favorite. And sometimes we can take their existing code and move forward with it. If the team that was working on it was relatively competent and things are structured okay, we can take that, run it through some of our automation and AI tools to evaluate the code and clean up things that need to be cleaned up. But sometimes I tell people right up front, because we always do that before we take on a recovery project. We run it through these tools that we have to make sure that if it's really badly written and badly structured and badly architected, and it's just sort of recipe for disaster, or they're using really old technology and they want us to build on that, we'd tell them right up front, we'd love the project, but we have to rewrite this. We can't. And we'll give them a really pretty detailed report on why. It's not just telling that they have to trust me. That because if somebody says, trust me, that's a code for you can't trust me, right?
Absolutely. So you actually do a pretty robust audit using AI then?
With AI and other non-AI tools that we have built. Yeah. Basically assessing the structure of the code, assessing the scalability, assessing the vulnerability, assessing the code stack that they used, and the database architecture, the coding architecture, the deployment architecture, all of that. Yeah. And then we will produce a report to that client within a couple days, a day or two after they give us access to their code library, which don't do that if you don't have an NDA in place with anybody. So we always offer that like right up front. It's a mutual NDA. Clients appreciate that they don't have to ask me for it, that I just offer it right up front. Say, if you have anything private you want to share, maybe we should do mutual NDAs first. And they go, yes, I appreciate that. And then they get a report and they say, okay, in terms of code quality, it's 80%. In terms of code structure, it's like 20% acceptable. In terms of code stack, it's a 0. We won't work on that code stack because it's so yesterday, right? And it doesn't make sense to build something new on top of something old. There are rare cases where it does make sense, but they're pretty rare. It's usually just, it was a comfort factor for whatever that team was. They're not staying current with technology. So they got them started on something old. Maybe they spent 2 or 3 years struggling with that team when it wasn't quite as old 2 or 3 years ago, but it was definitely on its way out at that point. Or they have to integrate with systems within their own company that are on legacy, and they have legacy capabilities in their team to maintain something already. And so they don't want to have to retrain their entire organization on something new. So that would be for an existing company, but they just need this thing built right and to grow and extend their business. And they'll worry about modernizing their development team and stack in the future. If they tell me I'm going to say there are people that do that, but not us. Java, an older kind of Java approach, not JavaScript, but Java or Ruby on Rails or something like that. Those are the older, just a couple off the top of my head, couple older technologies that we'll try to convert into something newer. But if there's a good reason why they need to be in those, we'll take it forward and consider doing those.
In those situations, there are other technologies that also can be helpful, like robotic process automation, right? Or you can but if you're putting together audits and you're trying to figure out how much effort is going to be involved with doing something on an old technology or legacy platform, I'm sure entrepreneurs or whoever's managing the project will feel really good about that.
Yeah. One of the things that I love personally is what I call workflow automation, which is what you're talking about, a robotic processing kind of thing. So basically taking anything that's a manual process, or even maybe there's a manual process involved in it, and then stringing these things together in a stepwise, smart way that can handle all the exceptions that you have. And I can give you a couple examples of that. One that was a non-AI one I did like 4 years ago. For the same guy, I'm doing it again, but I'm going to be doing it using AI this time. So there's a guy that runs this huge networking group. He's a friend of mine because I've been a part of his networking group now for like 6 years. And I came up with this idea of how you could capture information from the people that stand up and talk about their business very easily without having to stop listening, write notes, forget who they were after you've heard 30 or 40 of these. So I came up with what I thought was a cool approach to that. This guy is a machine. His network is huge. He runs it every week. He has his Tuesday morning networking meeting that has 70 people in it. He announces everybody like they're the most important person in the world. 30% of those people are always brand new, right? They're guests. And half of it's live in his location where he has 35 or 40 people. And then the other half is on Zoom. And he goes back and forth smoothly. Anyway, that was as a result of COVID. But anyway, I was going to pitch this to him when I was still only a couple of years with this organization. And he said, if it has anything to do with my Mondays, adds any more work, I can't even look at it. And so I heard him and I said, tell me what you do on Mondays. He says, well, I've got my Tuesday networking meeting and I spend about 7 hours on Monday getting everything lined up from a data perspective in his sheets, the spreadsheets, to get prepared for Tuesday. And I said, every Monday, 6 to 7 hours. He says, well, it's probably about 5 hours of actual work. And then people are calling and other guests are coming in at last minute when they shouldn't. And so I'm distracted. And sometimes it's 8 hours. And every quarter he does this huge thing where people come in nationally, where 300 people come in to the meetings and 50 panelists. And he says, those take 3 or 4 days to prepare for doing all this. I said, okay, forget my app idea. Let's talk about your workflow here. What are you doing on Mondays? And let me automate it for you. I figured this is, just a personal project. So I did it on my own. So he tells me, okay, fine. And when I finally convinced that it was possible, he said, okay, here's what I do. We spent an hour and a half, 2 hours. He went through his workflow. And 2 weeks later, I come back and I say, here you go. I automated all the things we talked about. He goes, no, I can't use that. And I said, why? He says, because it doesn't handle this or this. I said, well, you didn't tell me about this or this. But now I understand it. I'll go back and I can automate that. He said, oh, okay. Anyway, this went on for about 3 months. He didn't realize what he hadn't told me until he could see that it wasn't there. After 3 months, I finally got the whole workflow automated. We ran it in parallel with his manual process the first time, and it worked great. Then he started running it on his own. He ran into 2 or 3 bugs in the first 3 months, which I was able to fix in like an hour, because I basically did this through Google Sheets and writing automation scripts behind Google Sheets using Google App Scripts and integrating with his ticketing system. It was like, if I get to write code, I'm having fun. I'm indulging because I have people on my team that are all better than me because that's all they do now. And I'm running a business, right? But, I have to indulge a little bit. Anyway, he's been using it every day now for 4 years, and he's run into 2 or 3 bugs because of changes in the backend system. And he just calls me and I fix them. It takes him 15 minutes to prepare for Monday now. He got back almost a full day every single week for the last 4 years. And it takes him 2 hours or 2.5 hours for the big meetings twice a year instead of 3 or 4 days.
Kind of stories I love to hear.
That's a classic workflow automation story, right? That was without AI. So he has a radio station that has 200,000 listeners, and he's a big podcaster on top of that. And he's opened that up to his members if they want to broadcast through his network, and his network distributes to like 40 or 50 different places. So we were talking about that because I told him I'm launching my Scaling Smarter podcast. And he said, well, I hesitate to tell you this. I've got 6 of our members are actively pushing their podcast episodes to me. And I said, hesitate? And he says, well, it's just so many steps that I have to go through when, with the form they fill in, and then they get it wrong. And then I have to take that data and do it. I add it differently to different places. And I said, okay, this sounds really familiar, Dave. Maybe we should look at a workflow. He says, you think we could automate that? And I said, I'll use AI to build this. And it will probably take me, a day, maybe 2 days. And this will be equivalent to the one that took, 30 to 40 hours of effort. This will probably take me 2 or 3 hours to do, because AI will help me build the integrations to all the different platforms, to build all the sophistication in terms of the form, so that if they don't fill it out properly, it kicks a message back to that person who uploaded the podcast that this is the problem, so he doesn't have to deal with any of that, and do the automatic distribution based on their podcast and their theme and all the things that need to be there when it's pushing it out. And I'll buy him back all that time that he's spending now on that. But AI is like transforming how we can develop this workflow automation in particular. It's transforming how we do this.
Again, I want to go back to that a little bit. We have quite a few people who run startups or who are entrepreneurs or who are like wanting to be entrepreneurs.
Mm.
So I'd love to know a couple of things maybe about the Launch First method and how they can kind of build up their businesses. One of the main things I noticed is that startups struggle to achieve that product market fit. And we talked about this in the beginning. So how exactly can Launch First and AI be put together to meet those challenges?
Okay. So the number one thing is what prevents founders from being successful in finding product market fit early is the fear of asking customers for money. And so they delay that as long as possible, very often. They just don't feel the product's complete enough. They're afraid it's going to give a bad impression to somebody. They have to add more functionality to it. They're afraid to go out to clients before they build this. They're afraid that somehow their intellectual property is going to escape and somebody else is going to do this. I can just tell you that never happens except with the biggest companies, right? And Google might steal something from Apple, but that's because they're competing head on and they have infinite resources and recognize that this is strategic for a successful thing that they have to jump on. But for startups, I don't know. I'm sure it happens, but it's so rare. Fear gets in their way, right? So it's like, I won't fly because it scares me, the idea that a plane can fall out of the sky. But I'll drive across country to go see family. Your chances of dying in that car accident are probably 1,000 times higher than if you fly across country to go visit your family. So that's kind of the fear that people have to recognize. Talk about what you're going to do to everybody you can think of, except maybe the giant company that actually would see this as a strategic advantage and may decide that they need to do it. That's the only one you wouldn't want to talk to, unless you think they'd be an investor. But everybody else, talk with them about the problem. Ask them what the value would be to them. And then don't be afraid to ask them to buy it in advance. Don't be afraid to show them this high fidelity prototype, which is not a real product, and put a marketing plan together and a sales engine together for generating revenue. So this is the number one thing that stops founders. But now I'm trying to remember, the essence of your question was with AI to help founders and Launch First, right?
Yeah, basically the combination. Like, what would you recommend folks concentrate on in the beginning to kind of get over a lot of these hurdles? If you were to give them a perfect recipe.
Okay. Nail down the early adopter niche. The early adopter has the ability to make a decision They have a budget to buy your product, and they have obviously the need from an impact and cost perspective. Not the type of people in your particular market that are afraid to buy something early if the value is high enough. You want to create a kind of a FOMO situation so that they will buy, and they need it enough so they are afraid if they don't buy it now, they're going to buy it later, and it's a big problem they need solved. So figure out the problem, figure out that niche, and then figure out how to reach those founders. And AI can help you do all this really well. So I would ask, like, let's just say the low-hanging fruit, right? ChatGPT. Because I talk to ChatGPT all the time. It's like my best friend. Or if I don't get the answer I want, I go to Claude or I go to Perplexity. Perplexity is a great one, by the way, because Perplexity kind of acts like a researcher. It works just like the others in terms of producing kind of answers, but it will do it in a research way where it really breaks down into the steps, the things you need to know about that thing, where you go to find that information. It's really powerful. And it will crawl the web if you need it to do that. It does all kinds of stuff. So ask it, you're starting a startup in a particular industry, ask it. First thing I would do is go to all three of these tools and say, I'm doing a startup. These are the features. Don't be afraid that that's going to now be in their large language model because they're learning from you. Just get rid of the fears. Just be like, get out there and put it everywhere. The founders that are really successful do this consistently. Everyone I've seen that has made it is like all over the world with their ideas because they want to validate it, find opportunities, nail down that early adopter, refine the idea, refine the problem statement, because see that it's connecting with people in the way they need to. Give it your parameters of your product, what it is you're doing, what problem it's solving, what industry you're going for, and ask, how should I structure a prompt to identify the early adopter? Write me a prompt, a really detailed prompt that will nail down the early adopter and the value proposition and the perceived impact and how to reach them. I only want the prompt right now. I don't want the solution. And then it will rewrite your prompt for you, structuring it, giving you the roles, because large language models do a lot better when they know what role they're playing. If you say you're a business analyst or you're a startup researcher, right? And it will write the prompt and say what role it needs to be while it's doing these things and all of the questions it needs to ask. Then you just say, take that prompt and paste it into 2 or 3 tools and have it then run that prompt, and it will build a plan for you on how to do that for your industry specifically. And then in any one of the steps it comes up with, you could say, expand that step, right? And when it's finished writing it, say expand step 2 or expand step 3 or whatever the name of the step is. And now it's going to build a plan around how to execute on that step. So this is how founders should be using AI. We do this for everything, including code development. A little different when we're doing it for code development, but pretty much the same kind of concept.
That's an awesome point, because really thinking about startups and entrepreneurs and how they usually need to pitch, right? Sometimes they have to be their own best salesperson. Also, great use is to kind of put ChatGPT or Perplexity into the role of a sales manager or a sales rep, and kind of give them an idea of what you're trying to pitch, why, what that pitch is all about. And then it comes out with something that you can use and kind of, shift and tailor a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really nice to get some ideas. How about key metrics that founders should track when they're basically launching their startup, and maybe uses of AI for that?
Okay, that's perfect. So first of all, what is the strategy? What is your outreach strategy? And that a lot depends on who your market, who your early adopter is, right? Are they a enterprise? Are they a small business? Are they, what niche are they in? How do you reach them? So first thing is, how do you reach these people? Do you reach them through LinkedIn? Do you reach them through content creation, through social media, or is it a blend of all these things, right? So first thing is understanding the best way to reach them. Again, AI is really good at helping kind of narrow in where you're going to find these people. The second thing is, what is the content plan? If it's a content strategy, which everything is to some degree, obviously you need a website, landing pages, and all those sorts of things. But it's more about, okay, I'm going to create content, and then I want to push that content through social media. And what does that execution plan look like? How often do I have to post something? How do I use AI to enrich what I'm doing and to schedule it and to plan it? Again, ask Perplexity. This is perfect. This is the perfect kind of thing to use Perplexity for. Then now you need to track it, because none of this matters if you're not tracking it. So a really good tool for pulling this stuff together is Looker, which is owned by Google now, where you can configure any kind of dashboard and integrate with pretty much anything. But what you want to do is you want to know, okay, now I've posted the social media, all those social media posts, they are linking to my content that I've produced, whether it's a podcast episode or I was interviewed or it's a long form article, which AI is really great for helping you write those too. You can't just let AI write the whole thing, but it really organizes it and gives you a framework and content for each of the things that you want to put into it. Okay, how many people are clicking on my social media posts, right? So you're going to build a funnel. That's really what you want to do. You want to know how many people are hitting that social media posts to get to an article. How many of those links do I need for them to then take an action on the article, like click on a lead magnet link or link over to my site? How many of those links or lead magnets do I need to end up with a potential prospective client? If you don't know what your sales metrics are, which you won't if you're a startup, how many of those prospects do I need before I actually close a sale? And you put cost to all these numbers so you know that the cost of sale is this. And when you also add people time to it, this is the lifetime value of that customer. If you're not at a 3-to-1 ratio between those two things, you've got to optimize somewhere along the path because your business isn't going to be viable. If you're 1-to-1, that means you're literally breaking even before you're paying yourself a salary. If you're not at a 3-to-1, you don't have enough room because you're going to then shrink that room as you invest that money into scaling and growing. Do playbooks for each of these steps. That is the only way to scale, right? Where you turn this into a machine. I don't mean the people are machines. I mean, you bring somebody new in and now they know exactly what they need to do to be effective and successful. And then constantly look for ways to optimize this. Every step in the funnel in terms of how you're pushing out content, how you're creating social media, how you're making that sort of social media richer and more engaging. Something we started recently doing when we're creating this long form content is we create images in there, and these images have an engagement component to them, or they're videos, or there's something there. Many of them are just images, but some are actually giving you opportunity to do something with the image to engage with it. Have metrics that track each one of those things. So which images are they engaging with? How much are they engaging with the engagement content that's buried into my article, right? And have metrics and funnels for all that stuff. Eventually, it's all about what does it take to get a sale, right? What's the formula? If I double it at the top, then I'll have 2 sales. If I double it again at the top, I have 4 sales. And as long as there's enough margin there, that 3-to-1, I can start to reinvest the 2 part of that 3-to-1 back into growing and scaling the business without needing to go to an investor. So last point on this, investors should be for growing and scaling your business faster, to accelerate this, not to make it possible to operate your business. Unless, of course, it's a big R&D thing and you need a huge team of PhD AI developer. There are obviously lots of cases where you do need the investor up front. But in general, your MVP should be for proving product solution fit, not product market fit. You should have product market fit established before you ever start developing the MVP through pre-launch sales. And you should use the product that you push out for product solution fit. And what that means is that people are engaging with the product in the way you expect it. They're using it and their usage continues to grow. Because if they bought it and they were excited about it and they try it once and they stop using it, you don't have product solution fit. You may have product market fit because you can sell the next person. You don't have product solution fit, which will keep them engaged with the product and giving them the actual value, from a user experience, they want to use it. So they're getting the value that they had hoped to get. So that's what your MVP should be focused on.
I'd love to get 3 of your most actionable tips. Give me your best 3 that you think folks would really benefit from.
Assume any assumptions you made are wrong. Just assume they're wrong, or that you haven't proven them yet, so they don't really matter. And go out and test your assumptions. So anytime you have an assumption, if you don't have proof, even anecdotal proof, and anecdotal proof is only a certain level of value, right? Until somebody writes you a check, you don't actually have any proof in terms of the direction of product market fit. And until you have people consistently engaging with your product, you don't have any proof of product solution fit either. You may have a good instinct based on doing demos of your high fidelity prototype to these potential users of it. But until they actually start using it, you don't truly know if your product is going to turn into something that people are going to continue to use and grow. Make sure you understand what you're assuming versus what you actually have metrics to prove. And anything that you assumption, figure out how you can test it. That's number one. Number two is generate revenue first, before prove that you can sell your product before you start building it, because the building process may take 3 months to get an MVP up, but then it may not have enough functionality and features to actually sell. So you're giving away free betas. There's a couple different ways of launching, because some people say, well, I can't possibly launch this particular business because people need, when they talk about it, they're only going to pay if they can start using it right away. In those cases, and they're like service related type of offerings where the software helps you automate some kind of service functionality that you can't get otherwise. What we do is what I call a Fred Flintstone launch. And for those of you who don't know, Fred Flintstone is this old cartoon from the 60s and 70s of cavemen, cave families. But of course, they had things that represented modern conveniences like cars, except the cars had no engines. So they had to spin their feet like this to get the car moving. So I call that a Fred Flintstone launch. You basically sell them on the vision, but we cobble together some resources like Google Sheets and some automated scripts and maybe Zapier and a WordPress site, and manually drive the service for them until we have the system in place that we promised them. It's a great way to launch. And there are a lot of examples of huge businesses today that launched like this. For example, Airbnb was one. There are lots of examples of big companies that did pre-launch sales and launched that way. One that everybody will be familiar with is Elon Musk's Roadster. Remember, he was selling that Roadster before he ever had one. He had a prototype, which was not a real car, but it looked like a real car, but it didn't have an engine. It didn't work. It wouldn't go anywhere, right? But it looked cool. And he sold a lot of those. People got excited with the first electric sports car. So that's a pre-launch sale. So if people say, no, you can't do that, I mean, that was an expensive, high-risk purchase, and he sold a lot of them. So sell your product in advance of starting to build it. The next thing is buy this book. It's not my book, but I found it the best business book I've ever read. One of the best. There's a couple. One is, this one's not the best, but this is called Built. Oh, I can't remember the name of the book. Darn, that one slipped out of my head. That wasn't the best, but the best one, it'll come back to me. But it basically walks you through taking a business where the founder wanted to sell, but the business was in no condition to sell because he had way too many people he's marketing to and too many products that he offered. And it was, built to sell. So that was the name of the book. It's a fictitious case where this person who's very experienced in selling companies takes the founder through a 2-year process of converting his business into this machine that focused on one part of his business and could scale and created huge value in a business that would have been impossible to sell before that. So that's a really good one because it really highlights the idea of a playbook. They don't talk about playbooks, but it highlights the idea of you have to have systems that are very well documented that somebody else can come into so they can learn how to do the thing and execute and grow your team. The other one is the Mom Test. That's the best business book I've ever read. So the problem a lot of founders have is they go, look at my idea. Isn't this a great idea? And of course, your friends are going to go, either you're an idiot or they're going to go, because they want to be nice. I think it's an awesome idea. People that potentially stakeholders, they go, yeah, I'd buy that if you built that, but then they really wouldn't. And you don't know that. And they don't realize they're lying to you. They think they might, but then they're not doing the hard evaluation of would I truly spend money on that right now if it were available. Mm-hmm. So the Mom Test, the reason it got that name is if you ask your mother, assuming you have a good relationship with your mother, if you ask your mother, I've got this business idea, what do you think? What is she going to say? She's going to say, I think it's wonderful. So the question is, how do you ask questions about what you want to accomplish so that you'll get honest answers, honest, practical, clinical response from even your mom? That's why it's called the Mom Test. And it's just a brilliant book. It talks about a lot of the things I've been talking about for a long time and several that I didn't think about until I read the book. And it puts it into a framework that's very executable. the biggest suggestion I could have. And then talk to ChatGPT every single day and ask it what you should be asking. Don't ask it the question, get the answer. Ask it what you should be asking. Ask it how you should frame it, how you should approach this problem before you ask it to give you a way of approaching the problem.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's really valuable information. I love the tips. I think a lot of folks can use that. And thank you for the book ideas, because clearly it's interesting for anyone to dive in and kind of refresh themselves. And in some cases, things change, but not that much. And the only new introduction is getting more efficient, I think, through the use of like ChatGPT or other AI tools
Right.
to ask the right questions, right? Because there's a million different ways to do this. So thank you for this conversation. I wanted to kind of let you have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Techies, about your podcast, and obviously the Launch First method. Anything you wanted to mention about people getting in touch with you?
The Scaling Smarter podcast is going to have people that I'm interviewing who have a success and expertise in different aspects of business, and talking to them about what that expertise is and why it has been such a big impact in terms of the growth of their company. There'll be CTOs, CEOs, and COOs that I'm talking to, primarily of existing companies. But it's just going to be really fun. And they'll be fairly short, like 15, 20-minute interviews with these people, with the idea of just trying to get that raw value out of them really early in a very small period of time, as opposed to somebody who blathers on like me. Luckily, I won't be the one that's being asked the questions. So Techies, you can reach me at www.techies.com or on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn link will be in the podcast, and my email, which I'll share here, david@techies.com. And Techies is spelled, well, you can see from my name in the right there, Techies, Tekyz. We build systems for all different types of companies, lots of startups, as well as existing companies that need workflow automation, or very often they're looking at creating a new product. So they're kind of a startup inside their own company. They have an aspect of their business that they might be running manually, and now they need to turn it into an automation. And the third thing is, if you've got manual process or anything that you're struggling with, you feel like is preventing you from scale, feel free to give me a call. We'll put these estimates together. As long as somebody has a budget and they need something done, we will, on our own dime, create a functional spec that's fairly detailed document and create a very detailed estimate. And you can take that estimate that's all broken down by module, and you can take that estimate if you want and the functional spec and go to anybody else and get them to build it. And we don't charge for any of that. We just do this as a way of showing that we're really committed to basically delivering excellence and giving you a chance to make a good decision about whether you want to go forward with this project or not.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciated our talk today.
Yeah, I did too. The questions were just excellent. Thanks.
Please support the show by subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment. It's free and helps us grow and get even better content for you. And it's also appreciated.